But a lot of people used to say to me, why don't you try doing something else? Which is not really a good thing to say to a golf pro who wants to set the world on fire, obviously. Funnily enough, the first lesson that I had with my golf coach when I was 25 years old, back in Perth, he said to me, he watched me hit about 5 balls, and he said, "Really? You're a pro?" So, as I said, a little bit different in that regard. And I always said to him, look, I'm a very hard worker, I just don't understand my golf swing. But that's the beauty of the game of golf, funnily enough. You never know who may have some success and ultimately who won't. And I think it's possibly the most mentally challenging sport there is out there. And I have a bit of a theory as to why this is. Now, you might have a bit of conjecture on this, but golf, the ball is stationary, it's never moving. Every other sport, the ball moves. Football, baseball, basketball, soccer, netball. If you watch the game last night, Collingwood versus Sydney, was it Greater Western Sydney? Is that what they call them? Yeah, sorry. Apologies to any GWS fans. But when the play slows down and you watch these set shots on goal, you can see them thinking. You know, you can watch these guys kind of freak out a little bit. But in golf, we do that in every shot. If you watch the Matildas play, for instance, at the World Cup, the penalty shootouts, play stops, and then all of a sudden they have to think. So the mental challenges in that regard are second to none. And a question I often get asked is, do you still get nervous when you play golf? And absolutely I do, because I still don't really know where the ball's going. I mean, I have a general idea and a general sense, but sometimes I have completely no clue. And the other question I get asked a lot is, what's the most nervous you've ever been on the golf course? Matt said a little earlier, I played in 2 President's Cups, and hands down the most nervous I've ever been was at the 2005 President's Cup. We had one here a few years ago at Royal Melbourne. I don't know if you remember that. The Internationals played the US, and unfortunately the Internationals didn't quite get over the line, but it was an amazing event. But for me, I was playing in Washington, DC, which is, to say the least, an interesting experience because it's obviously an American home game. And I was paired in my first round match with a guy called Tim Clark, a South African golfer. You may or may not remember him. But he won the Players' Championship, a phenomenal golfer. And we're playing in a foursomes format, which is an alternate shot. And we're discussing on the range beforehand, okay, who's going to take the odds, who's going to take the evens, because that's the way you do it in the alternate shot format. Who's going to tee off the odds and who's going to tee off the even holes. And Tim says to me, why don't you take the odds, I'll take the evens, because those sort of shots suit me a little bit better. I didn't think much about it, but as I'm walking to the first hole, I realise, number 1, yeah, that's not on number, I got the first tee shot. So the heart rate started going up a little bit, as you can imagine. As I walk onto the tee, waiting for us was my captain, a guy called Gary Player, who's a bit of a legend of the game, and standing next to him, my childhood idol, the greatest of all time, Jack Nicklaus. To top things off, standing next to them was Presidents George Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton. So needless to say, I wasn't in a good space at that time. All as I could think of was, I'm a 33-year-old left-hander from Perth, what the hell am I doing here? Now, I've had my hands shake when I've played golf a lot. When you get nervous, your hands tend to shake. But on this particular occasion, my knees were shaking. And when your knees shake, that's not a good sign, because the next thing that happens is you pass out. So I had to have a real good discussion with myself as I was standing behind that ball. And one of the things I've been really good at over my career was the mental side of the game. I was able to bring my mind into the present moment for each and every golf shot, which is obviously pretty important, because nerves and pressure really only come about because you're worried about the result. You're typically not a good one. You're thinking about bad things. In this case, I was a little worried about decapitating someone on the side of the fairway and looking like an idiot in front of Jack Nicklaus. So I just said to myself, okay, what do I have to do right now? That was the one question I always asked myself over every golf shot. What do I have to do right now? And that brought my mind back into the present moment, and I was able to go through my routine, and I absolutely pulverised one down the middle. So it was a pretty cool moment, but relief was an absolute understatement. My journey, as I said earlier, is a little bit different in the game. The lowest handicap I got down to as an amateur was 2 as a 16-year-old. I know you're 15, and what are you off now, 6? So you're almost at where I was. When I started my traineeship at the age of 19, I was off a 4 handicap, which was the limit at that point. You couldn't be higher than a 4, I believe, back in the early 90s. After I finished my traineeship, I thought I really want to play this game for a living, but I enjoyed the coaching aspect, and I worked for a couple of guys at public golf courses in Perth called the Marangaroo Golf Course and the Carramar Golf Courses, if you may or may not have heard of them. 2 guys called Tim Crosby and Craig Duncan, who are amazing bosses, and I was with them for probably 6 or 7 years. Tim was the most amazing, charismatic boss I've ever had. And I remember my first day, he said, right, Nick, one of your jobs is you've got to go clean the toilets. And I thought, oh, great, here we go, first day. And he says, okay, you stand by and watch. I'm going to clean them, and I'll show you how it's done properly. Now, I don't know another boss who would clean the toilets for another person to show them how it's done. So I'll always remember that day with Tim. He was an inspiring fella. And Craig Duncan, who unfortunately passed away a few months ago, was the most amazing salesperson I have ever seen. People would walk out of the shop, not even coming in, wanting to buy golf clubs, and they'd be thanking him on the way out. It was just the most amazing salesperson I ever met. So they taught me a lot of the fundamentals I actually carried throughout my career into my playing career from a golf course perspective. So that was fascinating. I had a couple of real key turning points in my career. The first one was after playing the Geraldton Pro-Am, which is a place 3 hours north of Perth, where I managed to shoot 86, 88, 82 to finish dead last, or DFL as we like to call it. And my wife and I, we were married. I was married at the time, Alana. She said, okay, we need to figure this stuff out, because at the time I was 25 years old. And she said, if we don't make a plan, this is going to be a long road. Either that or, it's time to do something else, like teach and work at a golf club and things like that, which I was very happy to do. But we mapped out a 3-year plan, and part of those things was to find the right coach, find a mental person to really help us with my game, so a sports psychologist, and then to work on my diet and fitness and things like that. So apart from my swing, my mental game and my fitness, I was world class, I tell you. So it was really good. But it's funny, when you put that plan into motion, the right people come into your life at the right time, and that's when I met Neil Simpson, the coach, who didn't believe I was a pro. I started working with Neil McLean, who was a sports psychologist for the West Coast Eagles. He helped me with the mental game. And then fitness-wise, I really started improving there. And then everything changed. Turning point number 2 for me was at the 1997 Australian Open here at Metropolitan Golf Club, actually. I Monday qualified to get in, right on the number. Carried my own bag the first round, shot 67. And Alana flew over on the red eye from Perth, picked her up from the airport straight to the 10th tee at 8 o'clock, the tee time was, shot 66. And I'm leading the Australian Open by 2 shots over Lee Westwood and Greg Norman. And again, I thought, what the hell am I doing here? It was crazy. The back page of the Herald Sun on the Saturday morning, it said, Nick O'Who. Well, that was pretty good, actually. Whoever that writer was, he did a pretty good job. But I didn't win, but I did finish 5th, and the money that I made from that made me fully exempt on the Australasian Tour. And that 3-year plan I mentioned earlier, the goal was to have fully exempt status within 3 years, and I did it with just over 12 months. So the power of goal setting and making a plan was really important. From there, I kind of played more locally, Pro-Am circuits, things like that, and my ranking here in Australia got me into the European final stage of qualifying school, where I managed to get my card over there, and slowly but surely I worked my way up through the ranks in the golfing world, and just my mantra throughout my career, and it's still to this day, was always, how do I get better today? I wanted to be better when I went to sleep at night than when I woke up that morning, and I tried to structure my days with that philosophy in mind. And if you're looking for improvement, I guarantee you that is the way to go about it, because you add a lot of those days up over time and you improve without even knowing it. It's pretty cool, and I think you'll find a lot of high-performing people in any sport have that sort of a philosophy. My game was never built on power, strength, or anything like that. It was more finesse and accuracy. It wasn't very sexy, what you see, the guys bombing drives away these days. My coach Neil, who was always a character, he said, Nick, you're not really good at anything, are you? And I was waiting for the compliment to come, right? And he goes, but you see, you're really not really good. He says, you're good at a lot of things. So he liked to call me a tradesman in that regard. So I think that was Neil's way of saying it was a compliment. It was funny, when I was leading the Australian Open in 1997, after 2 rounds, I rang Neil and I said, Neil, look, I'm leading. What should I do? And he said to me, how the hell would I know? I've never led the Australian Open. Obviously, I'd rang the wrong Neil. I should have rung the sports psychologist. So. But slowly and surely, I worked my world ranking down into the top 50, so I was able to play all the majors, the world events, things like that. I didn't have many wins in my career. I can count those on one hand, but as Matt said earlier, the one thing I did do was I managed to beat Tiger Woods twice at match play, which was pretty cool. So I'll probably share those stories, because people tend to like hearing those ones, because he was, well, depends who you talk to. Is he the greatest of all time? I don't know, him or Jack Nicklaus, so time will tell in that regard. The first time I played him was at the World Match Play. We were in Carlsbad, California, and my caddy and I had this plan, okay, how do we beat this guy? Because he's number one in the world for a reason. And we came up with the theory of I can't get behind him because at that particular point, he'd only ever won a major, either leading or being tied for the lead going into the last round. He'd never won coming from behind. So if he got the lead on you in match play, it was basically game over. He's the ultimate front runner in that regard. Easier said than done, you could say. We watched him tee off the first, and I'd never actually seen him play in person. I'd never played with Tiger at that particular point. And the announcer calls him to this real long list of achievements that he'd won. He'd probably won about 10 majors at this point or something. And the crowd, there were thousands of people going absolutely nuts. And he unloads this thing, and it went off like a cannon. I look over at my caddy, and my caddy's there going like this, just watching the ball disappear into the distance. And he gave me a nudge because he said, hey, Nick, they just called your name. You're up, because I must have been doing the same thing. So, as it turned out on the first hole, I had an 8-foot putt for par to halve the hole. And going on my don't get behind him theory, it was a fairly important putt. So I bring Wilbur in, my caddy, and I say, what do you think the line is? And he says, what do I think? He says, I think this is for the match. So, big call from my caddy, obviously. But he knew that would really lock me in and get me focused. And I managed to roll that in, birdied 2 of the next 3 holes, and I never gave up the lead and ended up beating him 3-1, which was pretty cool. But I didn't have much time to think about it because I had to go back out that afternoon and play against actually the Ryder Cup captain, Luke Donald, next week. And I managed to beat him 5-4. Sorry, Luke, but you didn't have a chance after I was playing pretty good against Tiger. And then a couple of years later, we had a rematch, again at the World Match Play Championship. This time we're in Arizona, Tucson. It was a little different time because, and it was interesting in the fact that Tiger was trying to break possibly the most unbreakable record in golf. And not many of you may or may not know, but back in 1945, Byron Nelson won 18 tournaments in a year. 18 out of about 23. That's pretty impressive. 11 of those were consecutive. He won 11 tournaments in a row. And going into the match play, Tiger had won 7 in a row. So he was trying to break this record. And obviously, no one wanted a left-hander from Perth to win. And I heard about it all day. I went on the same game plan, stood on the first tee thinking, right, cannot get behind. And then through 7 holes, I was just playing par golf. I was level par through 7, and Tiger was playing awful. So I was 4 up through 7 holes. I put it down to the fact he was probably a bit intimidated playing me, because I'd beaten him last time. Kidding, of course. But then on the 8th hole, he hit this shot and he gives it the famous club twirl, and sure enough, he's back. The game just comes back and he just starts making birdie after birdie after birdie. And he pegged me back to about level through 16 holes. I birdied 17 to go 1 up. He birdied 18 to send it into extras, and then he had his one chance to beat me on the 19th hole where he had a 5-foot birdie putt. And I walk over to my caddy, Wilbur, and I said, Wilbur, thanks for the game. That was awesome. We gave it our best shot. And he goes, you might miss this. I said, no, he never misses these. But he did. It was amazing. I couldn't believe it. Again, I put it down to the fact that he might have been a bit intimidated, maybe trying to beat me. I don't know. But kidding, of course. But then I got him on the 20th hole. So 2-0 against Tiger. People often ask me, how the hell did you do it? That was my strategy, my game plan, getting ahead early. But I figured out his weakness, finally. He doesn't like short-hitting left-handed Australians. So that's what it is. So if you're short-hitting left-handed Aussie, you got a chance. So, but I was fortunate to play all over the world for 20-something years, but I stopped playing about 7 years ago because I found myself in hotel rooms not wanting to be there. I'd rather be home with my kids and my family. And we moved back to Australia here beginning of 2019. I'm from Perth originally, but we came to Melbourne thinking this is the greatest city in the world and we've always loved Melbourne. And then the lockdowns came. So the only city in the world where you could not play golf. So could you believe it? No, but we love it here. And in a way, I've come full circle with the game of golf because I started out as a teaching pro, helping golfers improve and get the most out of their game. And now that's what I'm back to doing again. I'm helping either young pros or mentoring whoever in that regard. I do a bit of coaching where I take people out on the course. I have pros through to about 27 handicappers, to be honest, and I get such a kick out of helping players improve and get the most out of their game. I ended up writing a couple of books, the first one by accident on the mental game. The first one was called Tour Mentality, Inside the Mind of a Tour Pro, which is a bit of a scary place to be at times. And then last year another book came out called How to Play Your Best Golf. So I'm doing a bit of everything in the golf industry, which is fascinating. And you're all here today thinking, which path do you take? And that's how I started out my career. Is I started out as a trainee pro not knowing if I'd be able to play the game for a living, but if not, I wanted to teach and I wanted to help other golfers. So there's a lot of symmetry in the room here today, and when they asked me to come and speak, I thought, yeah, this would be a great opportunity to sort of tell my story. And the funny thing is, whether you want to play or whether you want to coach or whether you want to run a golf club, my brother, for instance, it was interesting. I have an elder brother. He was a much better golfer than me as a junior. And when he finished school, he thought, I won't go down the golf route, I'm going to go to business school. So he went down that route. And then when he saw me doing well, he thought, hang on, I used to beat him, maybe I could do it. So he ended up turning pro and trying to make it out on tour. But you know, it's a little different trying to beat your little brother as a junior as to trying to beat all the pros in the world of golf, obviously. So he didn't make it there, but then he ended up running the WA PGA. And now he is the GM at the Mount Lawley Golf Club. So there's so many different paths you can take in that regard. And he's an amazing inspiration to a lot of golfers in Western Australia because he's winning all these sustainability awards at the golf club that he's at. And he loves the game just as much as I do. So the one thing I will say is enjoy the journey. There's so many different paths in this game. And I'm forever thankful that I just never listened to those people that said, why don't you try something else? So it was pretty cool. All right, thank you.
What sort of mindset or what sort of advice would you give to anyone that's sort of unsure about?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me, I think, throughout my career, whenever I was sceptical about something, I threw myself head first in. And I just got, let's see what happens. Because interestingly enough, especially in golf, you do fail a lot. If you don't win a tournament, you fail, for instance. You know, everyone thinks, well, you came second, that's good. Well, yeah, but you're first loser in a way is one way of looking at it, obviously. They pay pretty good checks for first losers these days, though, so I wouldn't worry about that in that regard. But I always thought about, okay, what can I learn from that situation and where will that take me from there and how can I improve on that? So I was never afraid to try something, and if it didn't work out, you could always pivot and try something else. Everyone's doing that in the game of golf. Take Tiger Woods, for example. He goes to a coach and starts working with them, and then all of a sudden he might try something else because he doesn't agree with that in that regard. That's from a playing perspective. From a golf course management or membership pathway program or getting your diploma and things like that in the golf industry, the good thing now is I'm assuming you can probably cover all bases in that regard. You can do these little educational programs online or offline or whatever and really open the world to a variety of opportunities. And whether you actually become a playing pro or a club pro, a teaching pro, a general manager, or you're an administrator of some sort, there is just so many opportunities. And my biggest advice is go with your gut as to what first feels right. Go head in and see what happens because there is no failure in that regard. There's only, I think, possibilities, which is a really cool way to look at it.
Awesome. All right. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Please thank Nick O'Hearn, everybody.
All right. Cheers.